As the debate over the assisted dying bill continues, while it makes its way through Westminster, new evidence is emerging that deepens fears over how the proposed law could reshape end-of-life care in the UK and the moral landscape of medicine itself. We've already reported on the core arguments surrounding the terminally ill adults end-of-life bill and on the growing push from campaigners who continue to claim, in the face of all the evidence, that it offers choice and compassion to those suffering from terminal illness. But fresh concerns from health professionals, legal experts, and faith-based care providers are raising urgent questions about the long-term consequences of the legislation, not just for the dying, who, according to the government's own impact assessment, cost a lot to look after and whose costs could be saved by this bill, but it could also have very serious consequences for those who dedicate their lives to caring for them. At the centre of this renewed debate is the question of conscience and whether the bill truly protects it or destroys it. While the legislation states that no doctor or nurse will be forced to prescribe or administer a lethal dose, critics say the reality is far less reassuring. Under the bill's current wording, healthcare professionals who object to assisted dying would still be required to refer patients to another provider at a stroke, destroying the concept of conscientious objection and making healthcare professionals complicit in the killing of their patients, whether they agree or not. I'm Peter Kearney, and this is Viewpoint. For thousands of doctors and nurses, the assisted dying bill profoundly threatens their right to freedom of conscience and potentially makes them complicit in the killing of their own patients. Being compelled to refer a patient to another provider is absolutely not a neutral act. It's the first deliberate step in a process that ends with the taking of life. New testimony submitted to Parliament describes that obligation as a moral trap, with one consultant in palliative care medicine telling peers that even referring a patient for an assisted death would make them, quote, a participant in the act, not a bystander. That distinction between direct action and indirect facilitation has become one of the bill's most contentious fault lines. And growing evidence shows that the impact could go far beyond individual conscience. Hospices across the country are warning of an existential crisis if the bill passes without a full institution-level opt-out. Many charitable hospices are founded on principles that reject any act intended to hasten death. Without explicit legal protection, they fear being forced either to allow assisted dying on their premises or to face the financial and reputational fallout of refusing to comply. A statement from several hospice leaders warns that public trust and, crucially, donor funding could collapse if their organisations are perceived as complicit in assisted dying. Hospice UK has echoed those concerns, saying that without clarity, the bill could fracture the hospice movement and divert already limited resources away from palliative care. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales has also weighed in, warning that a so-called right to die for some could quickly become an expectation for institutions to facilitate it. They argue, correctly, that care homes and hospices could be compelled to permit the process as a condition of state funding, forcing them into what they call a profound moral contradiction. New data from the Association of Palliative Medicine is also sounding alarm bells. A recent survey found that 95% of palliative care doctors would refuse to prescribe lethal medication. More troubling still, 40% said they would consider leaving their posts altogether if the law compels them to participate, even indirectly. The Catholic Medical Association calls this a workforce crisis in waiting. And they warn that the legalisation of assisted dying, combined with a weak conscience clause, could deprive society of the very specialists who provide high-quality palliative care, leaving terminally ill patients with fewer choices, not more. And it's not just moral convictions that are at stake. Legal scholars have warned that the bill's referral requirement could breach Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. They say compelling a doctor to refer a patient for a procedure they fundamentally oppose would be a direct interference with that right. Those warnings are not theoretical. The Conscience Clause in the Abortion Act of 1967 is frequently cited as a failed precedent. Doctors who have tried to rely on it have faced discrimination, career stagnation, and expensive legal challenges. Opponents of the assisted dying bill argue it risks creating the same culture of pressure and punishment for those who object. And as peers in the House of Lords look for international guidance, the evidence from abroad continues to paint a very worrying picture. In Canada, where assisted dying has been legal since 2016, the scope has already expanded, first to those with disabilities and soon to those with mental illness alone. In the Netherlands, once limited to terminal conditions, the law now includes cases of chronic suffering and even completed life, where elderly people seek death simply because they feel they've lived long enough. Or perhaps they've come under extreme pressure to end their lives from relatives keen to get their hands on an inheritance. We'd never know, as they can now be given death on demand. In both countries, initial conscience protections have completely eroded over time. Doctors who refuse to refer patients now face professional penalties, and some have left their specialities altogether. Cardinal Vincent Nichols, President of the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, has urged lawmakers to pay close attention to those international lessons. He's warned that once the line between healing and hastening death is crossed, it becomes almost impossible to redraw. The evidence, he said, is consistent across every nation that has taken this path. What begins as an exception soon becomes the expectation. He is, of course, correct. Beyond the moral debate, critics say the bill poses serious practical risks for the UK health system. Hospices and palliative care services already struggle with staffing shortages and uneven funding. If a significant portion of the workforce resigns or relocates because of conscience conflicts, that shortfall could deepen dramatically. There are also fears of a two-tier end-of-life system emerging. One where patients seeking assisted dying receive state support, while those who prefer traditional palliative care face longer waits and fewer resources. Supporters of the bill argue that these concerns are exaggerated and that assisted dying can coexist with strong palliative care. But opponents counter that the evidence from abroad tells a very different story, one where funding, training, and cultural emphasis quickly shift away from caring for life towards ending it. In the midst of this, some peers are now calling for amendments to strengthen protections. These would include a clear statutory right for both individuals and institutions to refuse participation in any form, from assessment to referral to the Act itself. Others have proposed an opt-in system where only doctors who choose to participate in assisted dying would be registered and authorised to do so. Opponents of the legislation say such safeguards are essential to prevent what they call a crisis of conscience in UK medicine. Without them, they warn, the bill could undermine not just professional ethics, but the very foundation of palliative care, a field built on the belief that compassion means walking with patients through dying, not hastening death itself. For now, the assisted dying bill continues its passage through the Lords, with further scrutiny expected. But the growing weight of testimony from doctors, lawyers, hospices, and religious leaders is making one thing increasingly clear. The questions raised by this bill go far beyond politics. They touch at the heart of what it means to care, to comfort, and to value life, even in its final moments.